The Paul Leslie Interviews.
Ladies and gentlemen, our special guest is a singer-songwriter. Austin Church has released 4 albums of songs, as well as having songs he co-wrote, recorded by artists like Lyle Lovett, Jimmy Buffett, and Reeves. So we'd like to welcome recording artist and concert performer Austin Church. It's a great pleasure.
Oh, the pleasure is mine, Paul.
Well, it's good to have you here, but I think most stories are best from the beginning.
Yeah.
Where were you born?
I was born in the nutmeg state of Connecticut, Hartford to be specific.
And did you grow up in Connecticut?
Not really. My father was in the service, in the Air Guard at that time, in the Army Air Corps at that time, Air National Guard, whatever they call it. So we moved around a lot. Shortly thereafter, we moved up into a rural area of Connecticut called Rainbow, which I love that. I want to write a song called Living in Rainbow, man. What could be more, sublime than that? And anyway, so then we moved to Suffolk County Air Base, New York, and then tooled around through the Panama Canal to Japan when I was 7. They're 8 and 9 and 9 years old, back to the States, to Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama. Lived there for quite a few years, and then it was on to Ohio, and then over to Wiesbaden, Germany, and then back to Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon. And then I went to school in North Carolina and got interested in country music and Bob Dylan and all that stuff, and transferred to the University of Georgia, had the bands there, and then went up to Nashville, Tennessee. So that's been the odyssey, and the thing is that as far as a hometown, I would pick Montgomery, Alabama, because I was there about 10 years of my developmental years. That's it in a nutshell right there.
And so Austin Church is actually a stage name, correct?
Absolutely, yes. In 1972, I needed a showbiz name. I was getting into it in Athens, Georgia. WDOL Radio, spinning the country platters. And so I came up with Austin Church, but if they'd had computers in those days, I would have been Vernon Mars. And that is because the computer slipped from the library, issued out, and it chopped off some of the name, as they will do, and it listed me as Vernon Mars, which is, of course, short for Marshall, or a chop off of Marshall, my middle name. And I really, really like it, and I kind of use it for artwork occasionally nowadays, just a whimsy type of thing, but I love that Vernon Mars. And that's what I would have been if we'd had computers and I had that occurrence, but I didn't think of it, so I'm very happy with Austin Church. I think I came up with a good one, and it's done me well all these years.
Who would you attribute your love of music? Was there an artist? Was it a person? What does it trace back to?
It's kind of a crazy thing, but one of my all-time favorite singers is Marilyn Monroe.
Really?
Of course, she's known as the sex symbol and a great actress and just the thing in the 50s when I was growing up. But if you recall, she also had quite a few songs in her movies. And I always thought she had a way of expressing a lyric. Judy Garland could obviously knock your socks off, and Whitney Houston and Bonnie Raitt. These are all, and my favorites too, but something about Marilyn Monroe just really hit home to me. And so I think I learned a lot about singing and emoting from Marilyn. Of course, I was a huge fan. So, and then getting back to reality, Bob Dylan, Hank Williams, Jimmy Rogers, and Johnny Cash would have to be the primary singing influences.
So you're heavily influenced by country music.
Yeah, with a great dose of Bob Dylan in there. Bob Dylan, when he came out with, I started in college in Brevard, North Carolina, and at that time he had the Freewheeling album out. And man, there was something about that, And then he came up with the one that he had a big radio hit on from Highway 61, Revisited. I was just huge. It's kind of a dichotomy, I guess, but Bob Dylan and Ernest Tubb, there's a divergence for you. So, yeah, country, folk, rhythm and blues, early Carl Perkins, huge Carl Perkins, It's a kind of a mix, quite a mix of artists.
We're talking with singer-songwriter Austin Church. Ernest Tubb you just mentioned a moment ago, and he had a part in your story.
Yes, indeed.
Tell us about that.
Well, I first heard of Ernest Tubb on a rock and roll station in the District of Columbia, riding around in Arlington, Virginia, and Barry Rich 'em Up Richards was on the air. So I don't know how in the world Ernest Tubb entered the mix of between Chuck Berry and Little Richard, but he did in conversation or something, or maybe he was appearing in the area or something. But I heard the name and I said, "Man, what a cool name, Ernest Tubb. Who is that guy?" So then years later, I found out that he was a primary architect of what we know as country music. Pretty much gave it the name country. It had been called hillbilly and folk before then, and he said, "Let's just call it country music." And so Ernest Tubb was a huge man in country music, and I just kind of gravitated to him, loved his style. He always encouraged other singers like Loretta Lynn and Patsy Cline, and I said, "Man, this cat, he speaks to me, what he's about." So I studied him and kind of tried to sing his songs, and eventually got a role in a Nashville production at the Texas Troubadour Theater near Opryland in 1996, where I paid a tribute for a year to the great Texas Troubadour. So it was me and Ernest. We had quite a connection there.
It's interesting. You went to the University of Georgia, and I have to confess I was a student also at the University of Georgia. So I was hoping you could tell us your recollections of the town, Athens, Georgia.
Well, musically, one of my primary landmarks was Ma Dean's dining room. Not related to Paula Dean, name spelled different. My Ma Dean spelled Dean. And she ran a boarding house up on Lumpkin Street, kind of on Fraternity Row. So I was at Russell Hall, which was a huge high-rise dorm for kids there, and somehow word got out, "Hey, man, we got to go to Ma Dean's, man. Get that country style cooking." Oh, yeah. So I found my way to Ma Dean's, and it was the first time I experienced the meat and three, a big bowl of limas and pintos and collards and all that, and with one meat and all the vegetables you could eat. It was $1 a meal. $1.10 by the meal, but if you got a 24-punch meal card, you got it for $1 a meal. And man, so that was big stuff. And then I wrote the song Ma Dean's, walking down the road toward Ma Dean's. She was the best country cooking queen, loaded up my plate with butter beans. Ma Dean, you're my gal. And then, so let's see, what else? I remember the bell that they rang after victorious football games. And, of course, the Lamar Dodd School of Art was my headquarters because I was in the program for Bachelor of Fine Arts. And I just loved it. Music and art, it was just so. And there we go. Now you're getting off campus. Somebody said, "Hey, Ray Whitley's singing down at the Last Resort, and Mad Dog Melton." I said, "What the heck is that? I got to check it out." So that shaped my life big time when I got to the Last Resort in Athens, Georgia, just a stone's throw from the campus of UGA. Man, I found my bailiwick, and there was Jimmy Buffett, Townes Van Zandt, Gamble Rogers, Doc Watson. I said, "Oh, I have found it." So the Last Resort, Athens, Georgia, UGA, big time.
Now, if someone goes to the Last Resort, it's just a restaurant. But in the day, it was also a music venue.
Oh, my gosh, was it ever? I mean, it started out, it was Ralph's Garage when it started. And I believe Kurt Smith and Mad Dog Melton bought the thing and, ran folk acts, people with acoustic guitars and in this shotgun building type thing there. Gene Scoggins, I believe, took it over. Anyway, they had, my buddy Townes Van Zandt in there picking, and Jimmy Buffett. I co-wrote a song, Brand New Country Star, with Jimmy when he was in there singing. And Mad Dog Melton would get out there with his Nashville Skyline-style J200 Gibson guitar. And then, a few years later, they bought the other part of Ralph's garage. And so they kind of had a double-wide club in there and enough room for bands, big bands. And then when I put a band together in 77, I went in there as a band, and they had the Dixie Dregs in there, David Allen Coe, all kinds of great, Randall Bramlett Band, all kinds of great rock and roll and country rock in there. It was just, for years, it was huge. It was very influential, and a chance for the bands in Athens to show what they were made of and develop a following. It was just last resort. I just can't say enough about it.
I wanted to ask you about the song Brand New Country Star. You co-wrote that song with Jimmy Buffett. Do you recall the experience of writing with him?
Yes, I do. I recall it in detail and clarity. Larkin Thompson owned the place at the time, and she and Jimmy kind of, were, friends. And I took a liking to a folk singer that was sharing the bill with Jimmy down there named Elizabeth Corrigan, a great folk singer. So the four of us, the two couples, we repaired to Larkin Thompson's apartment and had dinner. And then when we were starting to eat, I said to Jimmy, I said, man, look at, Ernest Tubb, Bill Anderson, all these acts and these Trailways buses. Man, think about all the cheeseburgers those guys eat. I mean, how do they handle that for so many years? He immediately said, right after I said that, he said, he outgrew his sequin suit and sold his Trailways bus. And then we had dinner. I mean, that was it. And then we ate a nice dinner. We repaired to, Jimmy and I went into the living room, me and Jimmy, and a jug of Beam, B-E-A-M, Beam whiskey, and sat it on the hassock there. Jimmy grabbed his Martin guitar. I grabbed a pad and started writing like mad. There it was, the Brand New Country Star. And, we put all the, I first had a Plymouth Satellite. I rode around in a Plymouth Satellite, and Jimmy changed it to a Lincoln Continental, which is more fitting for a Brand New Country Star. And so there we go. We wrote the song that night. Jimmy was such a high-power, energetic guy, and still is, that he went into the resort club that night and sang the song, or attempted to, but he bogged down because he didn't have the words. And ironically, I walked in right at that time of his little stumble and handed it. I'm not going to let go of the song I've written with Jimmy Buffett, so I had the words, and I handed it to him, and he finished the song, and that's the story. Note for note. That's it.
What are your recollections of his personality in that time? What kind of guy was he?
Upbeat, smiling, carefree. He just exuded, I guess, what you would call the laid-back Key West mindset. It was just such a pleasure there. Like they say in the islands, down in the Virgin Islands, no problems, man, no problems. Well, that was Jimmy Buffett. No problems, man. It was a flow about his style, his performing, his life, the fun, smiling, strumming guitars, and just loving life, living large. That's my impressions of Jimmy.
As mentioned at the top of the interview, there have been a few artists that have recorded your songs in addition to Buffett, the great Lyle Lovett, and also the late Del Reeves.
Right.
Who has done the best job, in your opinion, of something that you wrote?
Wow. Boy, that's a toughie. I guess I'd have to say Jimmy, because he slammed that baby out of the park, hit it with a fat part of the bat. It's an album cut. I don't know if he does it on the shows, but Don Gant was producing, in Nashville, Tennessee, and they just got it right. The whole album. It was the album that Come Monday was on. That busted him out as a star. In fact, he'd had that out, so he was just breaking the envelope of stardom at the time I met him and wrote that song on the heels of Come Monday in 1973, 74 time frame, and this great guy named Don Gant, who was also a great singer, and produced that, and they just got the right pickers in there, they got the right mindset, and they just created a beautiful album. Pencil Thin Mustache was on there, all kinds of great songs, and so I was just thrilled to have mine included in that mix, and it was a great session, and it holds up today. So I guess I'd have to go with Jimmy's version of Brand New Country Star.
What was the song that the late Del Reeves recorded that you wrote?
He recorded a song that I wrote with Joe Collins, who at the time was the keyboard player for Tom T. Hall. And Joe and I wrote a song called I'll Take My Chances, about, living the way you want to live, with all the sugar and coffee and booze and rolling the dice and sort of turning a nose at the doctor, but I'll take my chances. And Del did a beautiful job because he was just that kind of guy. I mean, not that he lived that way, but that he could put an upbeat take on lyrics like that. He was just so yeah, that was it. I'll Take My Chances, Del Reeves.
And tell us about the song that you co-wrote that was recorded by Lyle Lovett.
Well, that was bittersweet because in 1990, I guess it was about 93 or 4, in that time frame, I was down in Franklin. I was on the radio, and, I was in the mix of a bunch of oldies. So the sales manager, he started calling me the Sheikah Shaboom. And I loved it. So then I went on and created other names behind that. The Raja of Rock and Roll, the Sultan of Soul, the Baron of the Blues, and so forth. And I thought about all these things. And then there was a writing session set up for the great Walter Hyatt, who was in Uncle Walt's band with David Ball and Champ Hood. And they had a great following. And then Walter went off as a single act. And so he did a lot of writing with my friend Ken Spooner, who was also known for a song he wrote with Kim Williams called If the Devil Danced in Empty Pockets, He'd Have a Ball in Mine. So anyway, Ken Spooner and Walter Hyatt were writing, and he tuned into the airwaves right before their writing session, and he said, "Man, Walter, I got a title. It's called the Sheikah Shaboom." So Walter loved it, and they got a nice jazzy riff behind it and put her together, and I found myself included in the little writing party there, in the little writing session. There it was. But I say sadly because Walter lost his life in 1996 in that tragic value jet crash in the Everglades. I don't know if you remember that, but
I do a little, yeah.
Yeah, it was so he was really just on the crest of busting out. He had a band called King Tears Band, and he was performing at the Sutler in Nashville, 12th and Porter, all kinds of places, and he was getting the just desserts that he'd long worked for. And he had a beautiful family, his wife and a couple kids, and it was just wow. But anyway, he was a great friend and mentor to Lyle Lovett. So Lyle, they had a celebration of life for Walter shortly after he passed away, and one of the performers was Lyle Lovett on there. And Shelby Lynn actually sang the song Sheikah Shaboom at the celebration of life, but Lyle liked it so much that he recorded it twice, once in Nashville, once in Hollywood. Now, to date, he hasn't released it, but I'm hoping he will. But he's got two beautiful cuts. In fact, it was hard for me to decide between his version of that song and Jimmy Buffett's song that I mentioned, because it is a beautiful cut with a trumpet and a swing, a jazz fiddle, and all kinds of stuff. So Walter's band, Uncle Walt band out of Austin, Texas. They were originally from South Carolina, but they really get a great following in Austin, Texas. At that time, Lyle would sit at their feet and enjoy their music and look up to them. And they would let him come on during their intermissions and play some songs. And so from then on, he just revered Walter Hyatt and what he was about in his music. So I think in a great part he recorded that song as a tribute to Walter. And then Champ Hood's son from that same band, his son has been doing the song too. He's got a really great folk country swing band. So that's the story of the Sheikah Shaboom and Lyle's connection to it.
You're listening to our interview with singer-songwriter Austin Church. Do you have a song that is most meaningful to you that you've written?
Oh, well, right off the top, I'm going to have to say Miss Ola, the Mississippi Giver, because in 1999 I was looking at the transition section of Newsweek, and there was this picture of a lady, humble-looking woman, big eyes, a subliminal smile. It said that she was a washerwoman philanthropist. And that's an interesting juxtaposition of words. And it turns out that she started washing clothes in 1920 and went all the way to 95, some 75 years of washing clothes. And she amassed $250,000 in that time and gave most of it to the University of Southern Mississippi in Hattiesburg, her hometown. So I said, this speaks to me. This sings to me. This lady, this humble, obscure washerwoman, giving all this. She was an only child, and she never married, and she never had a chance to go to college, but she said, I want somebody's child to get an education. So she gave all this money to USM, turned it into a great scholarship program. It was just Miss Oler, the Mississippi Giver, a humble washerwoman. And that song, there's a video I have on it produced by Ralph Clemente, the late Ralph Clemente out of Valencia Film School, Valencia Community College in Orlando. And so it's probably the most meaningful to date. It's just incredible. Miss Ola, the Mississippi Giver.
What makes you happiest?
Well, when I am fulfilling the talent that God gave me. My mother and father, through the whole journey of the arts, consistently said, son, we just want you to be happy. When it all comes together, when I'm in a concert and the people are smiling and you can tell there's a connection, they're responding to what you're doing, that hour and a half on stage, I am happy. It's wonderful. So I'm so thankful to be able to be doing it.
What is the best thing about being Austin Church?
The best thing about being Austin Church, wow, sharing smiles with people you never met. There's just some reflex action. It just seems to be a natural thing for me to write songs that kind of pick people up a little bit. At least I hope so. Now, I do write some blues and some sad things, but a lot of my songs have a distinct message of hope in them. And when that comes across, wow, that's a trip. And I say, well, I guess this is what the church man does. So that's what I like most about being Austin Church.
One of the wonderful things about broadcasting is the fact that you can reach people. So in this interview, I just kind of wanted to give you an open-ended question of what would you say to the audience? Anything at all?
Well, one thing I would say is, especially to people that are wandering down and stumbling on the road of life, pick up a guitar instead of a gun. With a guitar you can strum. With a gun, somebody's all done. Your whole idea of vengeance might come undone. If you pick up a guitar instead of a gun. And so, I had that rolling around in my head for a long time, and I guess that's my message, is to let's get down and jam. We have a lot more in common than divergent ways of thinking and ideologies. The E note, natural, is the same in Chinese, and it's the same in India, and it's the same in Bermuda, and it's the same in Racine, Wisconsin. D diminished and E flat, whatever. It's the human language. So that's my primary message. We've got to sing, pray, and communicate in the human language.
All the listeners out there, they can check out the website. It's austinchurchmusic.com. My last question, who is Austin Church at heart?
Wow, Austin Church at heart is kind of a kid that wants to do something, that wants to be a kid that wants to lift folks at heart. I've got a song called Trust Your Drummer, because your drum beat, that's your heartbeat. Your ticker, that's your kicker, and your kicker is your drummer. And you won't be torn asunder if you let it go and trust your drummer. So, trust your heart. Yes, Austin Church is one who trusts his heart and never, ever wants to cheat on his own heart.
Well, Mr. Church, thank you so much for sharing with us.
Oh, man, I tell you what, stories wouldn't be stories unless they were compiled, annotated, and chronicled. And I can't thank you enough for the storytellers for what you are doing, allowing people to tell their stories from the Lassaw Caves right on down to Paul Leslie. It's so, so important that you have the passion to share stories. I thank you from the bottom of my heart, Paul.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Well, Godspeed, my friend.
Godspeed to you, Paul.
All right, I hope we run into each other sometime.
I hope so.